CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Chinese and US officials meet in Switzerland, hoping to reset the strained relationship between the world's two biggest powers.
Our other headlines: the office of Austria's leader, Sebastian Kurz, raided as investigators begin a corruption inquiry.
France and Spain say the EU must act to reduce energy costs as gas prices hit record highs.
And the museum made from plastic to prick our conscience and change our buying habits. First it was Anchorage and now Zurich. Top diplomats from China and the United States are meeting for a second time this year. This all comes as tensions between the superpowers are higher than ever over a range of issues, including trade, tech and Taiwan.
Well, in a moment, we'll be talking to our correspondent John Terrett in New York. But first, let's join Giles Gibson, who's in Zurich. So, Giles, what more can you tell us about the meeting?
Well, Robin, we've been outside the convention centre here in Zurich where these talks are taking place. There's been a few flurries of activity throughout the course of the day, but very little information coming out from that meeting that's going on behind closed doors. At one stage, the US delegation all piled into a convoy of black cars and drove away, and then they came back to the venue about 2 hours ago. As far as we know, the Chinese delegation led by Yang Jiechi has been inside that building throughout the day as these talks have been going on. And even before the meeting started, both sides were really keeping their cards close to their chest about what they were even going to be discussing. The Chinese Foreign Ministry simply said that they were going to be discussing China-US relations. The White House was slightly more specific, saying that they were going to be discussing how to responsibly manage competition between Beijing and Washington. So really at this stage we are just waiting for any sign that these talks are wrapping up, and then waiting to see what the two sides will say about what was discussed and then potentially what was agreed between them.
And Giles, have things changed between the two since the Alaska meeting?
Well, some extraordinary scenes at that meeting in the US state of Alaska back in March. We saw Yang giving this 15-minute speech in front of the cameras, and then US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who was at that meeting, insisting that the cameras stayed in that meeting room so that he had a chance to respond in front of the world's cameras. Since then, there have been efforts to try and repair the relationship a bit after those tense scenes in Anchorage. There was a telephone call between Yang and the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in June. We then had, of course, in September, US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping holding a roughly 90-minute telephone call just about a month ago. And we are actually getting reports, these are unconfirmed at this stage, that the reason or the main focus of these talks is potentially to prepare for some sort of virtual summit between the two leaders coming up in the coming weeks.
Giles Gibson in Zurich, thank you.
Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. John, compared with President Trump, is the Biden administration better disposed to engage with China?
You know, Jamie, Robin, it looks that way, doesn't it? But it's taken a long time to get here. I think we all thought that the Biden administration would be rather more open and less sort of aggressive towards China than we have seen in the last 8 or 9 months. And the reason for that is that Biden, of course, spent all those years in the Senate. He's the ultimate diplomat. He's been all over the world. He knows everybody. He knows everybody in Beijing. He knows President Xi. But it has been 8 or 9 months since he was inaugurated back on the 20th of January. And very little has changed, really, between the Biden administration and the Trump administration. Remember the background to this. We still have all those Chinese companies, telecom companies in particular, delisted over at the New York Stock Exchange. We've got the Untitled Chapter bill working its way through Congress at the moment, still in the House. And we have Americans unable to invest in a range of Chinese corporations, and that list was expanded by President Biden. It was started by President Trump. It was expanded by Biden. Now, it is an uncomfortable thing to hear, but I have to tell you that Americans are being told on an almost daily basis that China is their new enemy. It used to be Russia. Now it is China, and this happens in radio programs, television programs, and newspaper op-ed columns all the time. And these are the key issues. The expansion into the South China Sea, through which 60% of the globe's maritime trade passes, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and forced transfer. Now, the first three, Beijing says, butt out. It's none of your business. These are domestic issues. Regarding forced transfer, which the Americans call stealing, Beijing says, look, if you want access to our billion population, then you have to help us understand how you run parts of your businesses. And then there is Taiwan. And here is President Biden now speaking on the issue of Taiwan. It's a very short clip. Pay close attention.
Well, China has, I've spoken with Xi about Taiwan. We agree, we'll abide by the Taiwan agreement. That's where we are.
China says comments like that and others from key people in the administration here endanger the one China policy. China says Taiwan is a part of China, and the US must halt any irresponsible remarks regarding Taiwan and potential Taiwan independence. Beijing says it will take all measures to stop any independent moves in that direction by Taiwan. Jamie and Robin?
John, Taiwan is one issue on the agenda here, but obviously trade is a huge point of contention following the US new trade policy announced on Monday. What can we expect next?
Well, I think that's absolutely the key issue, and it's a very, very good starting point for a conversation to be opened up and for more conversations to happen. We have Sullivan now with Zhang Jiechi in Switzerland after that fiery, horrible event that happened in Alaska back in January. It looks as if things are on a much more of an even keel now in Switzerland than way they were before. And on Monday we had Catherine Tai, the new US trade representative, setting out for the very first time and speaking on behalf of the Oval Office, on behalf of Joe Biden, setting out US policy towards Beijing regarding trade. Tai calling out Beijing, saying that it has failed to live up to its promises in phase one of the Trump trade deal signed in January of 2020. The new ambassador to Washington, D.C. pushed back on that and said that's rubbish. We are following the agreement faithfully. But Tai is also calling for frank conversations in the future with Beijing on the issue of trade. I know a lot of Chinese people felt very offended by that. They said, you know, why is she coming up with this rather aggressive language? And the answer is that that's the American way. You know, she needed a headline and she got it by talking about frank conversations about phase one. Also, she pushed back on Beijing trade policy as she sees it hurting democracies in Europe and in the United States in areas like solar and agriculture and semiconductors as well. The big one, of course, just finally, was that the Trump tariffs are remaining in place. They think at the White House that that gives them a leverage over Beijing that they otherwise would not have. Beijing is now saying, look, we're happy to talk, but we're not going to be pushed around. And then, of course, there's COP26, Jamie and Robin, which you two know only too well. That is the next big diplomatic event. It comes up in the beginning of November, and both sides know that they have to work together on this issue. It brings them together as well. So it does look, as you suggested in your question, as if talking is now getting underway at last, and that talking is going to, and it sounds a rather wishy-washy thing to say, but it sounds as if talking is going to be key to closer ties, I think, after the Trump administration between these two countries. Jamie and Robin?
John Terrett in New York, thank you very much.
It's an international group dedicated to improving policy, but the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development needs a reboot. He made his case at a meeting of the trade group in Paris. Blinken has also been trying to diffuse tensions between the United States and France, caused by France's exclusion from the new US-UK-Australia security initiative. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris. So, Ross, what have we heard so far?
Yeah, Robin, it's ongoing. This news conference held at the conclusion of 2 days of talks at the Ministerial Council level. 70 ministers attending here in Paris at the OECD headquarters. There are 38 member nations in the OECD, like-minded free market democracies like the United States and Germany on the big side, down to smaller nations like Costa Rica and Finland. All of them here to discuss mainly climate change and security. And they were the two top priorities for this MCM Ministerial Council meeting. The first chance for Matthias Cormann, the new Secretary General. He's only been in place for 4 months. He was hosting the event, and Antony Blinken was chairing the event, leading the US delegation here. The Secretary of State getting involved in the OECD, but of course he's got a lot of other things on his plate. We can touch on that in a moment, but what he has said in the last couple of minutes, Robin, is that it's terrific to be back here in Paris. This is where he grew up. He's a fluent French speaker. He said that we are the closest of allies and the oldest of friends with France. The OECD, according to Antony Blinken, is an important forum where things can get done. Things have got done in policy terms since 1961. He said that we are focused on the critical challenges that face all of our economies, all of our nations that are in this club of rich and developing democracies. But we are focused on a sustainable recovery and on a green future. He also lambasted what he described as a self-defeating race to the bottom on tax. I lower my rates and you will lower yours, and then Jamie will lower his as well, and we just continue like that in a self-defeating race to the bottom. What he wants to see is a global tax agreement. Standing next to him, Matthias Cormann, the Secretary General of the OECD, said that we are at the, quote, pointy end of discussions to try to reach a tax accord globally.
And Ross, as you said, Blinken has had quite a lot on his plate during this trip, including a diplomatic crisis.
Yeah, so he was coming here anyway, Robin, for the OECD meetings, leading the US delegation. But ever since we had the explosion of this diplomatic crisis between US and France last month, when he's now coming to France, he's always had to deal with that issue first. Tuesday morning had a meeting with Jean-Yves Le Drian, the French foreign minister. After that, he also had a meeting with Emmanuel Macron, the French president. That wasn't on his agenda, but he met the French leader. Then he went on French television on Tuesday night. He was brought up here in Paris, as I say, a fluent French speaker, so an appearance live on French TV, not a problem for Antony Blinken. And he said that we could have done better. We should have done better. We could and should have been clearer in our communications around this whole submarine deal that Australia cancelled with France and then renegotiated and signed with the UK and with the US. And Emmanuel Macron is in Slovenia at the moment at the EU summit. Well, when he arrived, almost simultaneously at the same time as Antony Blinken was on French television giving his interview, Emmanuel Macron was speaking in English in Slovenia about the whole issue as well, saying he's looking forward to meeting US President Joe Biden, confirming that's going to be taking place in and around the G20 summit, which is going to be held in Italy later this month. Emmanuel Macron believing that it's going to be a good occasion for productive talks, underlining the fact that the US and France do want to work together to try to find a way out of this crisis. This AUKUS diplomatic crisis really has broken the US-French relationship, and so appearances like Antony Blinken here physically in Paris to hold talks are the starting blocks of being able to find a way of closer alignment, common ground to repair that relationship.
Ross, thanks very much. Ross Cullen there in Paris.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, why we all need to be keeping a close eye on growing inflation and the difference it can make to our way of life.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Just a reminder for you that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
European natural gas prices have hit record highs. That's likely to translate into more expensive energy bills for EU citizens. But leaders are also worried about a full-blown crisis that could significantly slow down Europe's economic recovery from the pandemic. Well, CGTN's correspondent Ryan Thompson is in Frankfurt for us. Ryan, how will gas customers be affected by this?
Hi there, Jamie. Well, it largely depends on the country, because we're seeing some EU countries taking preventative domestic action to try and limit the burden and limit the impact that the customers at home feel as they turn on their heaters or their kettles or their stovetops. In the case of France, we saw them at the beginning of the month implement a 12.6% rise, but stopping it there for the entire winter until they are at a point where they can reassess in the month of April. In the case of Italy, there will be no hike at all. It's really a big question here about these price caps, because EU countries are likely to do whatever they can to stop prices from rising and to protect consumers. But, Jamie, at the end of the day, somebody has to pay. And there's some really significant economic questions here. Notably, we've talked about it time and time again over the past few months. It's all about inflation. When we talked about inflation at the beginning of the year, quarter one, we were talking about strong demand fueling growth. It was the good type of inflation. But now we're looking at a supply-strained economy that will cause inflation, but it will be high prices that are actually weighing down on growth. And so the fear here is that this inflation will ultimately hurt Europe, and it will not be on track to make the same economic recovery that they had expected.
A long, cold, and expensive winter is likely ahead for millions of Europeans. The continent is facing a severe energy crisis that sent prices for gas and electricity soaring. The base price for natural gas hitting $135 Tuesday, up from just $20 6 months ago. EU leaders meeting in Slovenia have called for the crisis to become a top priority, but there are divisions within the bloc about a common approach.
The EU must change its policy because partly, the reason why the prices are up is the fault of the Commission. So we have to change some regulations, otherwise everybody will suffer.
Europe's southern and eastern countries are feeling the biggest pinch. Hungary, France, and Spain have all enacted domestic policies to limit price rises. But that will cost national governments billions, and prices are still expected to rise even more in the next few months. Some have called for Brussels to offer emergency funds to alleviate the pressure. But those calls have so far gone unanswered.
It is a serious issue. I think we have to be very clear that the gas prices are skyrocketing, and but the renewables, the prices have decreased over the last years and are stable. So for us it's very clear that with energy in the long term, it is important to invest in renewables. That gives us stable prices and more independence.
Effects of the energy crisis will go beyond regular Europeans' electricity bills. A Economists warn it could hold back the entire bloc's economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Bond prices have fallen sharply, and there are increasing concerns about further inflation.
We have three massive autumn storms to endure. One is rising inflation, the second is the fear of rising interest rates, and the third is the economy, because there are commodities and supply shortages. The markets are struggling and it will remain very volatile.
And European markets were again under pressure today. Investors were unable to really tame the jitters that are stemming from these inflationary pressures and really soaring energy prices. We're seeing the biggest effect in government bonds, but also in some cash equities trading, which are really struggling to make recoveries after previous losses week on week. Overall, investors describing the market mood as a wall of worry that's just fueled by these inflation concerns, Jamie.
Brian, EU leaders can jump up and down and complain, but I mean, realistically, what can they do?
Well, two big options on the table, but after the summit today, we really saw them increasing the pressure on the Commission, on Ursula von der Leyen, to do something that's far more concrete, because right now what we're looking at, it's just words. The EU Commission is promising to release a so-called toolkit next week that will have a bunch of different pieces that governments can take to sort of improve this crisis and find a way out of it to survive the winter. But leaders, above all, are mad. The two things that we know, at least right now, that the European Commission is likely floating, one would be subsidies, because as these governments put price hikes in place, well, there are a cost difference in between what they're paying for the commodity and what the customers are paying for the gas that reaches their home. Somebody will have to pay for that. So if money will come from Brussels to offset the cost, that could potentially alleviate a lot of the pressure on national governments. The second thing that we heard Ursula von der Leyen discussing on Monday was the idea of forming energy reserves. But that is really a non-starter, because these commodities are selling at quite high prices. That's in a limited supply right now, and it's not likely to improve in that situation anytime soon. Russia has said point blank that the supply will stay as is. So Europe is really at odds right now about what they can do. The Commission has limited options, but these leaders will likely fight it out, because otherwise it will be a tough winter.
Ryan Thompson in Frankfurt, thank you very much.
The International Monetary Fund has scaled back its forecast for global growth this year because of supply chain shortages. Its prediction in July was 6%, but the outlook will be less optimistic when the fund's economic outlook is published next week. Prachi Mishra is an advisor to the IMF and co-authored a section of the report that deals with inflation.
In Chapter 2 of the World Economic Outlook, which we just published, we forecast higher inflation will likely continue in the coming months. And our forecast is that annual inflation in advanced economies will peak at 3.6% on average. And emerging markets, on the other hand, will see faster increases, reaching 6.8% on average in the final months of this year. But risks remain tilted to the upside for both advanced and emerging economies. And on the other hand, inflation is expected to revert to pre-pandemic levels by mid-2022. For advanced economy, on average, headline inflation will decline to around 2%, and for EMs to about 4%. But let me quickly stress two things that come out of our research. One is a key feature of the outlook is significant cross-country heterogeneity across advanced and emerging economies, and even within advanced economies. So while the United States is driving the strong inflation dynamics for the AEs in the short term, with near-term risks tilted to the upside, underlying inflation in the euro area and Japan actually remain quite weak. And the second point, let me emphasize that considerable uncertainty surrounds these forecasts, given the uncharted nature of the recovery we are in currently. So risks of an acceleration do remain. For example, sharply rising housing prices and prolonged input supply shortages in both advanced and developing economies, and continued food price pressures and currency depreciations in emerging markets could indeed keep inflation elevated for longer.
So what's really been driving these inflation surges? We've seen high gas prices, for example. How much of an impact are they having?
There have been three broad drivers of the increase in headline inflation rates we've seen since start of the year. First is the pickup in economic activity as economies recover from the deep contraction in 2020, or in economics terms, what we call closing output gaps. And it was indeed supported by accommodative fiscal and monetary policies, along with the release of pent-up demand and accumulated savings. The second reason, as you correctly pointed out, is rapidly rising commodity prices. And just to give you an example, global food prices are now up by more than 30% over past year, which is especially acute challenge for low-income countries where expenditures on food make up a big share of their consumer baskets. And the third reason is input shortages and supply chain disruptions. We don't actually go into the specific decomposition of the drivers. However, what we do in the chapter is some simulations where we look at the impact of continued strong increases in commodity prices and sectoral price shocks. And we do find that the peaks could be higher and the return to trend could take longer than in the baseline forecast I just talked to you.
So do you think that central bankers are doing enough to fight these high inflation numbers that we're currently seeing?
Look, I think the good news for policymakers is that medium to long-term inflation expectations remain well anchored. But there's indeed disagreement about how enduring will expectations be. And a key concern is identifying the conditions that would cause recent inflation spikes to persist, leading to unanchored expectations or so-called self-fulfilling inflation spirals. And here, let me point out something that, look, ultimately central bank credibility and price expectations are very difficult to precisely define. And any complete assessment of anchoring can't be decided entirely based on relationships in historical data, which we are able to do.
The European Commission is reportedly planning to charge Apple with anti-competitive behaviour. The charges relate to tap-and-go payments on iPhones, specifically Apple's refusal to let rivals access its system. This could lead to a fine and force the tech firm to allow payments from other operators. The EU investigation into Apple Pay was launched last year.
Half-year results for the UK's largest food retailer, Tesco, saw sales rise by 3% to $37 billion. Tesco's profits have also doubled to $1.5 billion. The company has sought to reassure customers that shelves will remain stocked over Christmas, despite supply problems.
HMD Global has released its first tablet under the Nokia brand. The Finnish company, who bought the Nokia license in 2016, is aiming to challenge Apple's iPad. The Nokia T20 runs on Google's Android operating system and is said to offer 15 hours of battery usage on a single charge.
A former Tesla worker has been awarded $137 million by a U.S. federal court after claims that he was the subject of workplace racism. The black employee was hired in 2015 through a staffing agency and says he endured racial abuse while working at a factory in California. It was not immediately clear if Tesla would appeal against the decision.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the offices of the Austrian Chancellor are raided. Sebastian Kurz finds himself investigated for bribery and corruption.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild, crazy ideas. Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh,
we hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN. Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories: Chinese and US officials meet in Switzerland, hoping to reset the strained relationship between the world's two biggest powers.
The office of Austria's leader, Sebastian Kurz, raided as investigators begin a corruption inquiry.
And France and Spain say the EU must act to reduce energy costs as gas prices hit record highs.
EU leaders have told 6 Balkan countries and territories they can join the EU if they meet the necessary requirements. But the summit in Slovenia failed to set a date. Let's talk now to our correspondent Lucy Hoff in Brussels. So, Lucy, where do things stand now?
Well, Robin, this is, of course, a long-running political saga that's been running really since the 1990s. Those 6 Western Balkan states who have been pushing to join an enlarged European Union. Now, there was a sense from EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen today that she was very clear that those 6 Western Balkan states would be welcomed into the European Union, but there was much that needed to be done before that happened in terms of the process to do with economic reforms, on corruption and on areas of rule of law. This summit was not about taking a concrete decision, but it was about reaffirming ties and reaffirming the EU's commitment to that process. There was an acknowledgement, again, from Ursula von der Leyen about the impatience and the frustration that many of these Western Balkan states, including Kosovo, Albania and North Macedonia, feel about the lack of progress in these talks. Now, the message from now caretaker German Chancellor Angela Merkel was that this was a case of when, not if, but there was a refusal from those EU 27 leaders at the table to set a specific date for a session.
I don't really believe in setting dates. I believe in making good on our promises. Once the conditions are met, the accession can take place. So far, there could not be any accession because no country has fulfilled the conditions.
So, Lucy, clearly divisions among EU member states over the Balkans membership bid.
Yeah, and that was acknowledged by the EU Council President Charles Michel, who said it was no secret that there were deep divisions on this issue from the EU 27. This was a summit that was called by Slovenia, which is currently holding the EU Council presidency, which was hoping to ensure a concrete date to allow those 6 Western Balkan states into the EU by 2030. There was reticence amongst other EU leaders to specify that date, as we were hearing from Angela Merkel there. Some member states, such as Germany, saying that they supported the idea of an enlarged EU, but elsewhere there is concern that many countries amongst that 6th number are not ready to be members of the European Union, that the EU is currently dealing with problems with member states such as Hungary and Poland and needs to ensure that it's in a solid situation before it allows any new members into the bloc. Leading those calls is France and the Netherlands, and with an election year coming up in France, there is a sense that this is not an issue where we are likely to see any major compromise in the short term. But certainly there is enough here for these 6 Western Balkan states to feel reassured that the process is underway.
Lucy Hoff, thanks very much indeed.
Austria's Chancellor Sebastian Kurz is at that summit in Slovenia, but back home his offices have been raided and he's been placed under investigation on suspicion of bribery and corruption. Johannes Plesberger has the details.
Mobile phones and other electronic devices were confiscated during this morning's raids at the Chancellor's office, as well as at the Chancellor's party headquarters. According to media reports, the raids are linked to accusations that Kurz used government money for a series of expensive newspaper ads in exchange for favorable coverage by the publications. The homes of 3 of Kurz's most senior advisors were also raided, as was a department of the finance ministry. Austrian ministries traditionally have a large budget allocation for advertising, something that has been highlighted by campaigners as a possible conflict of interest for media companies. It's the latest problem to hit Kurz. In May, an investigation was started against him on suspicion of perjury. Johannes Blechberger, CGTN, Vienna.
The Czech Prime Minister heads into an election on Friday, tainted by revelations of his financial dealings in the Pandora Papers.
Around 12 million documents published earlier this week contained compromising information on world leaders, politicians and billionaires, with Andrej Babiš shown to have used shell companies to buy luxury properties in France. Penelope Lietch reports.
He's the populist billionaire vying for re-election when Czechs head to the polls on Friday. Andrej Babiš is still the front-runner, but has been hit by allegations in the Pandora Papers that he put $22 million into shell companies to buy a chateau and other properties in the south of France, and failed to declare it. He has denied any wrongdoing and, as the election week began, claimed the revelations were designed to hurt his campaign.
There are 5 days to the election, and that deal was done 12 years ago. It's clearly an issue that should influence our elections. We've seen this before in 2017. That time it was about bonds. I fundamentally reject it. I was a businessman at the time, not a politician.
Babiš's ANO party have stood firmly behind him, as 5 opposition parties who share policies closer to those of the EU have joined forces to create 2 coalitions aimed at defeating the Eurosceptic leader. It's not the first corruption scandal to hit the Prime Minister, who's been campaigning on a strong anti-migration ticket, supported by close ally, Hungarian leader Viktor Orban.
Who is the person Andrej Babiš brought here as an example to follow? Viktor Orban, a person who limits free media, a person who restricts universities, a person who denies the rights of minorities. The LGBT community in Hungary is under bigger pressure than it was under communism. What is going on there has nothing to do with what we're offering you.
Babiš has indicated he will leave politics if he doesn't retain the leadership. The election result is expected to be close.
Penelope Lietch reporting there.
The European Union says it's exploring solutions to a row between France and the UK about fishing rights. France's Prime Minister Jean Castex has accused Britain of not respecting agreements reached during Brexit negotiations. Nicole Johnston reports.
It's on again. France and the UK at loggerheads over fishing rights. These are pictures taken 4 months ago, when about 80 French boats gathered at the St Helier port off the British island of Jersey to protest against post-Brexit rules on fishing rights. In response, London sent Royal Navy ships to the area. The boats have gone, but the problem is far from resolved.
La Grande-Bretagne ne respecte pas.
Great Britain doesn't respect its own signature. I can tell you that my government are following this matter with all needed precaution. Month after month, the UK presents new due conditions, refuses information without any reasoning, and delays giving definitive licences that it should be giving.
France argues the UK has failed to grant the full allocation of fishing licences for French boats to operate in Britain's fishing zone. It says it will take the dispute to a council to arbitrate on post-Brexit issues, and may review energy, trade and rail links between the countries. But the UK sees things differently. It says it has issued fishing licences to vessels if they can prove they've been fishing consistently in British waters leading up to Brexit. On Tuesday, Jersey issued a dozen extra licences. However, 87 applications were rejected.
Making strong statements is no substitute for dealing with the technical, difficult issues that have got to be worked through. So we hope that rather than continuing to make these statements and to suggest disproportionate countermeasures. We continue to work together with the EU Commission on the methodology and on the data.
The two countries have been in dispute over fishing rights for years. At times it has turned violent. A Brexit agreement was meant to settle the dispute once and for all, but it's far from it. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is promising a change in direction for the country's economy. He told his party conference that he would take control of immigration to boost wages and deliver on Brexit. And he said current supply problems were the result of an economic rebound after COVID shutdowns. Well, our correspondent Andrew Wilson is following the story. So, Andrew, tell us about Boris Johnson's speech.
Well, Robin, the more you think about it, actually, the more interesting it becomes. It was, as far as his supporters were concerned, I'm sure, vintage Johnson, cracking jokes, moving fast through any number of subjects, 45 minutes in total, and when it ended, the crowd were almost surprised before they started to applaud it. He seemed to stop in mid-sentence and go, that's all I've got to say. It was full of jokes, full of optimism, which is what his party loves about Boris Johnson so much, but very light on policy. There didn't seem to be any kind of tackling of the intentions of where the economy is going to go, just broader-based promises about a bright, sunny future. Bear in mind there's been best part of 2 years of pandemic. It's not surprising, perhaps, because a lot of policy has been in stasis. But if you look between the lines, actually, he talked about inequality. He talked about life expectancy in different parts of the UK being different. He talked about education standards in different parts of the UK being different. He talked about people shouldn't have to move to find work. They should be able to find work where they lived. He talked about slowing down the economic powerhouse of the southeast and building more and investing more in the northern parts of the country, traditionally the poorer parts of the country. Now, that's not exactly widespread Tory policy. That is something fairly new. And though it was non-specific, he did talk about the drift and dither of previous governments. Well, previous governments include two Tories, David Cameron and Theresa May. And you can hear from his comments today, the conference could have been listening to him and thinking he's not very proud of what the Tories have done in the last decade. Perhaps there are some changes coming. Listen to this.
Of growth and economic revival is not to reach for that same old lever of uncontrolled immigration, to keep wages low. The answer is to control immigration.
So, Andrew, plenty of applause in the hall from his own party members, but how has the Prime Minister's speech been received outside the conference?
Well, what was missing from what Boris Johnson had said today is what's actually going on in the country at the moment, the headline concerns of the general public. And I fancy that within the conference as well, there are some Tory MPs and Tory members who are concerned about what's coming down the pike as far as winter is concerned for the UK. So the Prime Minister talks about a brand new economy with high wages, high productivity, investment in infrastructure and investment in peoples and skills. At the same time, there are queues for petrol outside. There's a shortage of HGV drivers, which everyone knows about. There are animals now being culled on the farms because there's no butchers to put them into the market. There's concerns about the cost of fuel, a possible energy crisis coming down the line, and also a pretty open fight taking place now between business leaders and the government about helping them find more employees. This dearth of employees is starting to deeply trouble British business, and Boris Johnson's line so far has been, listen, you've got to see this through. These things will right themselves. Why don't you pay people more? Well, business is saying we can't pay people more. If we do, taxes will go up, and inflation will go up, and things will get more difficult. Now, prices are on the way up, and wages thus far haven't caught up. So there is a difficult winter on the horizon as far as the government's concerned. And there may be some worries that what Boris Johnson is doing is pulling his old tricks out of being light-hearted and humorous and attractive and entertaining as a leader, but still hasn't grown into the idea of mastering policy and practicing what he preaches. They'll be waiting, but some will be concerned.
Andrew Wilson, thanks very much.
The pandemic, a Brexit deal for the UK and an energy crisis have all contributed to massive disruption in our global supply chains. Martin Bish is the CEO and co-founder of the UK startup Habu. The company helps startups as well as small and medium-sized enterprises with e-commerce. Martin, welcome. Give us a taste of how bad the world's supply chain problems are from where you are. How bad is it, do you think?
Thanks for having me. I think it's not as bad as it's going to be. I think we're just seeing the beginning. So we're in an unusual position because we have a lot of clients that we work with. We fulfill for them. We post their items out when they sell something on their websites or on Amazon or eBay or other channels. And we have about 1,000 clients. So that gives us a good cross-section of e-commerce sellers. And we're seeing two things. There's certainly an issue with supply chain. We're seeing people struggle to get their inventory from places like China in particular, of course, and for all sorts of reasons, because they're having struggling to manufacture it. For instance, there are some problems in China, as there are across the world, with fuel, and this is leading to some factories slowing down. There's also a shipping container shortage, which is resulting in people struggling to ship their stuff to the UK and to Europe. So I think that there are a number of reasons why it's happening. But what we're also seeing, and I think the two combined are perhaps even scarier, is a loss of consumer confidence. We're seeing that across those 1,000 clients, across about 200,000 SKUs, there's a general dip in sales. And so we're seeing a lack of consumer confidence, concerns presumably about inflation, about the promises of empty shops at Christmas, in all sorts of other areas of the economy, fuel being another one. We're seeing a lack of confidence, meaning there's in some ways less interest in purchasing right now. That plus the supply chain issues, I think, are a bit worrying.
Martin, you paint a very gloomy picture. Let me ask you, having highlighted all of these many factors, what are the solutions, if there are solutions?
Well, I think that there are many solutions because there are many problems here. These fuel problems have obviously been caused over a number of years as we've stopped investing in fossil fuels, continue to invest in green fuels, and haven't really compensated for the fossil fuels we haven't invested in. There's a sort of deficit emerging there. Lack of investment in nuclear, of course, has added to the issue. So that's on the supply chain side of it. On the other side of it, of course, you've got Brexit and COVID and the issues that they've caused as well. On the other side, the consumer concerns, again, a natural consequence of us coming out of the period of COVID, of the inflation, of the difficulty in finding staff. It's a multivariate problem, so I'm not sure that there is a single solution. I don't think anybody really saw this coming. We've been worried about COVID for the last 2 years, and in the meantime, we've neglected the economy.
Martin Bitch, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. A message in a bottle. A museum with a warning that it's time to change our ways.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. It's a week since over 100 inmates were killed in a deadly prison riot in Ecuador. It took security forces days to regain control of the jail.
Many families are still waiting to hear whether their loved ones are among the dead. Dan Collins reports.
Anxious families are looking for their dead. Tatiana Intrigalo is looking for the body of 34-year-old Eduardo José Valencia, but says she's had no answer after days of back and forth with the authorities.
It's been 8 days since the boy died, and I still cannot get him out of the morgue.
She says the problem to get his body is that he had no ID documents. The father, also named Eduardo, said his son had been incarcerated for a minor drug-related offence.
Last Tuesday I realised he was dead because I spoke to him by telephone on Monday, but the next day I couldn't get through to him, and I haven't been able to speak to him since.
Juan Valencia, no relation, says he's looking for his 26-year-old son, Carlos Andrés. He's had no contact or any official information since the massacre which killed 119 prisoners last week. Luz Proaño is desperate for news of her grandson, Julio César León.
I want to know what happened to him. They told me he's not on the list of dead or injured, but I've had no communication from him. I want to know if he's dead or alive. If he's alive, I can be at ease.
Dozens of desperate families are coming here to the police forensics department in Guayaquil. Some have come to identify a body. Others simply don't know what happened to their jailed loved one and are looking for answers. Major Ruben Terán, in charge of the forensics laboratory, said on Monday that 107 of the 119 bodies had been identified.
We still have 12 bodies which could not be identified because of the condition in which they were found as a result of being burned.
The governor of Guayas region, where the prison is located, said the government will invest $75 million to address the problems within the prison system.
We are working to make the prisons safer but also more humane. Part of what happened in this massacre, which shouldn't happen anywhere, is that past governments didn't contribute the resources or management necessary to ensure that it could not happen.
He also said the families would get financial assistance to bury their dead, as well as psychological help. A week after the tragedy, many families still can't lay their dead to rest. Dan Collins, CGTN, in Guayaquil, Ecuador.
Crowds have gathered outside Kabul's passport office after it was reopened by the Taliban. Many Afghans, including those trying to flee the country, have been unable to leave due to a lack of paperwork. Passport processing had already begun to slow before the Taliban took control of the country in August.
The son of the former Philippines president, Ferdinand Marcos, says he'll run for president in 2022. Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. declared his candidacy in a Facebook video. He said he supported the current president, Rodrigo Duterte's controversial drug war.
Singapore has agreed a deal with German pharmaceutical firm Merck to buy its experimental anti-COVID pill. Australia has already bought the drug, called Molnupiravir, while Thailand, South Korea and Malaysia are all in talks to buy it. Trial data shows it could reduce hospitalisation or death by 50% for high-risk patients.
Hundreds of people have demonstrated in the German city of Leipzig in support of a Jewish singer who was refused service at a hotel. Gil Operin had been wearing the Star of David. He says a hotel employee allowed others to skip ahead of him in the queue, and then he was told to pack up his star before allowing him to check in. The Western Hotel is investigating.
This year's Nobel Prize in Chemistry has been won by two scientists for their work on mirror image molecules. German Benjamin List and Scottish-born David Macmillan will share prize money of more than $1 million. Their work's been used for discovering new drugs as well as molecules that are environmentally friendly.
UK tour operator TUI has cancelled all flights to the Spanish Canary island of La Palma for the rest of this month. This as the volcano continues to erupt, with red-hot lava seen exploding into the air. The eruptions, which have damaged more than 700 properties and led to thousands being evacuated, are now into their 17th day.
Environmentalists in Indonesia have built a museum made entirely from plastic.
They want to convince people to change their buying habits as plastic pollution continues to flow into the world's oceans. Chijia reports.
This outdoor exhibition in the town of Gresik in East Java took 3 months to assemble. It's made up of more than 10,000 plastic waste items, from bottles and bags to sachets and straws, all collected from polluted rivers and beaches.
This makes me feel that I will have to buy reusable things such as drinking bottles instead of buying plastic bottles. Also, by looking at how much waste there is here, I feel sad.
This statue is the museum's centerpiece called Dewi Sri, a goddess of prosperity widely worshipped by the Javanese. Her long skirt is made from single-use sachets of household items.
We want to send a message to the people to stop the use of single-use plastics. These plastics are very difficult to recycle, and these wastes pollute our nature and oceans. Starting today, we should stop consuming single-use plastics because they will pollute our ocean, which is also our source of food. Because at the end, those wastes we throw out will end up returning to our dining table.
The museum has received over 400 visitors since it opened early last month, and it does help open visitors' eyes to the scale of the problem.
I will definitely change my life habits. For example, like when I go to the market or to a grocery store that provides a plastic bag, I will switch to a tote bag, and when I buy a drink, I will use a tumbler.
At the museum, a background of thousands of suspended water bottles has become a popular location for selfies shared widely on social media. It's hoped it also brings home the message of the need for urgent action on waste plastics crisis. CGTN.
A canine commuter in Istanbul has attracted an enthusiastic following. The street dog Boji is a regular sight in Europe's largest city. His various excursions are tracked with a microchip, and he's known to visit at least 29 metro stations a day, as well as the ferry.
In fact, Boji is thought to travel up to 30 kilometres in any 24-hour period, something that's attracted around 50,000 followers on social media.
2 months ago, we have noticed a dog trying to use our trams, our metros, our trains, and he knows where to go, he knows where to get out. So it was quite interesting, and we have started to follow him. And it was really an interesting pattern. It's something like that. He knows where to go, and he has a purpose.
Just goes to show that anything is possible. Appalling pun.
Terrible. Sorry about that. The headlines again. Chinese and US officials have met in Switzerland hoping to reset the strained relationship between the world's two biggest powers.
The office of Austria's leader Sebastian Kurz has been raided as investigators begin a corruption inquiry.
And France and Spain say the EU must act to reduce energy costs as gas prices hit record highs.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching. More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Preview. Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.